We're going to do something a little different this week when we talk about news. And that's because a lot of what we're going to talk about has been talked about really well on other Crooked Media podcasts. Like I just guest hosted PodSave on Tuesday of this week, and Tommy and I got to talk about Florida's Don't Say Gay bill and what they're doing in Texas. But one thing that I think is a common thread between a lot of the really nutty laws we're seeing now is that they target teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they force teachers to do things that teachers, that's not why they got into the profession. And they penalize teachers for not snitching on their students or outing them to their parents. And so I kind of wanted to get into all the ways that Republicans are now targeting public educators and what that means. So we've got some good data here from PEN America. Since January 2021, 122 educational gag order bills have been introduced or pre-filed in 33 different states.
So fucked up.
It's so fucked up. 12 have become law in 10 states, and 88 are currently live. What's going on?
Well, Erin, I think that all these sort of crazy fringe groups, you know, look, a lot of it goes back to Donald Trump, giving these people the room to think that they're sort of like very archaic, racist, I don't know, fucking points of view can somehow be, I can't even think of the right word, Erin, that people can stop progress from happening by putting cameras in classrooms and keeping teachers from teaching the current state of affairs, you know? And they're like, oh no, they have made subjects taboo and vilified the teachers who are teaching curriculums that have otherwise been non-controversial for years because they think that it's going to help this pendulum swing back in their direction and create more little MAGA babies. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And my view of it is a little bit more paranoid, as my view on many things is paranoid. I have, I'm sitting here like collecting my fingernails here, but my view on it is it's a little bit more insidious than that. I think that conservative groups are targeting educators, like forcing them to have cameras in classrooms, like you mentioned, forbidding them from speaking about LGBTQ issues as they're doing in Florida, forcing them to out students to their parents as they're doing in Florida, penalizing, making teachers mandatory reporters for parents who are providing any sort of medical care at all, gender-affirming care for trans kids in Texas. But there's other states too. And in Florida, they're also like trying to sell, like we're preventing critical race theory being taught.
Right.
We're just increasing the, we're making it so that the curriculum is accessible so nobody is hiding the curriculum, which never was happening in the first place. I think what they're doing, these conservative groups, are selling to extremely media illiterate people.
Yeah.
That the way that students become radicalized is in schools. When that we know that that's not the case. Students are becoming radicalized and they're accessing information through the internet. That horse has left the barn. That horse has left the barn. It left the barn in like 1999. Like there is the information that students want to get, they will get. So they're selling to these conservative old people, crazy school board meeting, low media literacy people, that this is what that people are being radicalized in schools. But meanwhile, I think the end game for these groups is privatizing public education. I think what they're trying to do is hobble teachers, make teaching so undesirable a profession that more and more people leave it. That public schools become less and less desirable, and that we eventually end up with privatized public schools. And I really think that's what's going on. In the meantime, all of these like vindictive, spiteful, awful, small-minded, Helen Lovejoy style people think they're like helping, in the culture wars. The culture wars, that's done. That's done. These kids have already figured it out, and they will figure it out without your help. I think they want to take public education away. That's my theory.
You're correct, because almost exclusively in all these bills, and of course, it's a lot of private companies are targeted and public schools. The other thing that all these groups are doing, which we saw with especially the abortion laws in Texas, is suing people. So like your point is entirely correct about just trying to drive people out of the profession, driving teachers out of teaching, because in Florida, parents can sue schools under that bill if they think that the lessons that kids are being taught are inappropriate. And there are similar laws in like Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Being a teacher is not a profession that you go into to get rich, that you go into for a lot of glory. It's like you go into it because you believe and you want to teach young people. And I mean, it's like, how much are you going to put yourself on the front lines of all of these sort of things coming at you? Where's the upside at some point? So I think you're right they're just trying to drive people out.
Yeah, I mean, and another thing is a lot of these people, a lot of the people that are empowered to file lawsuits have no fucking business filing lawsuits.
They have no standing. It's like, it's exactly
people
right.
who don't live in the district, people who don't have children in the district are empowered to sue schools for carrying materials that run contrary to these laws, for discussing things in classrooms that they've denoted as like controversial. It's just basically, it's the Texas abortion law, like the Busybody Karen Act, but like applied to public schools. And that's something that I'm hearing from teachers who have been kind of impacted by this kind of round of craziness, is that a lot of the people that are the loudest, that are complaining the most, have no fucking business complaining. They don't have any kids in the classroom. You know, they're being busybodies, and they're doing foot soldier work for these organizations that actually ultimately don't really care about what's being taught in classrooms. What they care about is that private companies are not able to profit off of education as much as they want them to be able to. And so this whole thing is like so insidious and gross. And I don't know. I don't trust the Supreme Court. I don't trust the Supreme Court to protect teachers. And I'm really, really worried about the state of public education in this country. Truly, it's deeply upsetting. I want to talk a little bit about Missouri. We don't really hear Missouri in the conversation as much when we're talking about Florida and we're talking about Texas. But Missouri has 16 bills pending, all of them introduced since the start of 2022. They want to ban the 1619 project specifically. A lot of conservatives really hate the 1619 project.
Makes them very uncomfortable.
It makes them very uncomfortable. Interesting. Snowflakes. Divisive concepts are banned. Certain ideas about race and sex are banned. And students must be presented with a positive picture of U.S. history. Honestly, here's another thing that I've been thinking about. Like, this could kind of be summarized as the All Children Left Behind Act. Because when these kids go to college and they're confronted with the fact that America was built on stolen land and stolen labor, they're going to look like real fucking dumbasses.
They're going to be like, wait, what? That's not what I learned. And also in Missouri, something that I found particularly offensive on behalf of teachers is that parents or members of the public, there's a bill where parents or members of the public should be able to go in and watch teachers while they take, so like animals in a zoo, watch teachers while they take professional development courses. Could you imagine? Like, just some backbenchers watching you just take a professional development course? Are you fucking kidding me?
First of all, the kind of insanity that you would have to willingly watch someone else's workforce development courses, like that was, oh man, my teachers they're not exciting. The workforce development, they ask a teacher. It is not exciting.
All you have to do is watch Abbott Elementary and their professional development episode, and that is the truth, Erin. It is right there on this big screen.
Right. It's not that exciting, but if you're the type of person who is so bound and determined to fuck with teachers that you're willing to sit through that, you are really made of stuff that I do not want in the water. It's really deeply, deeply weird. And it, again, like relies on these people who have just totally bought into the conservative mindset that public education is out here indoctrinating kids and turning them gay, which is just crazy because TV's turning the kids gay. You know,
it's and also
Euphoria.
To your point again, Erin, your point at the top just like keeps being proven over and over because in Indiana was the one I think that tells on itself the most because they get to the heart of the matter where they're like, oh, their bill, I think it's HB 1040, bans teaching socialism or similar, quote unquote, similar political systems that aren't compatible with principles of the US. It's like, what are you talking about? Which, if like Republicans just hadn't like made every ad in 2020 about socialism and 2022 about socialism, which doesn't exist and isn't happening. Like it's socialism and critical race theory are their two faves in these bills.
Yeah. Also, CRT, just to remind people, is a law school level course. It is not your fucking Braden and Kinsley are not learning critical race theory in second grade. Here's another thing that's kind of like a big picture thing. As I was reading about North Dakota banned critical race theory and also is requiring all instruction be factual and objective, which is funny because
air quotes.
The implication here is that objectivity is the perspective of being like a white man in power, because like why is that the objective viewpoint and not like the viewpoint of a person of color, a queer person, whatever. Anyway, something that I was thinking about is these are the same people that think that teachers are babysitters. Like I think with a babysitter, when you have somebody coming over to your house and providing childcare, you can say, this is the schedule of naps that, we're following. This is what I'm feeding my children. And these are some books that I have purchased that you can read to my kid. You have like control, like it's a person providing childcare. Someone providing public education is not somebody who you don't get a say over what public education is. As a parent, you do, as you get to elect a school board, but like
right. Exactly.
you don't get to tell the teachers how to do their job because they don't work for you. They are providing education to children to make them better citizens, which doesn't necessarily mean they're doing what you want to do at home. And that's, I think, a hard thing for parents to come to terms with, especially if they just think that teachers are glorified daycare workers or just there to look after the kids. And again, like we're talking to Ai Jen Poo in this show, and like looking after children, providing childcare is super, super important, and it's a highly skilled job, but it's not the same as what teachers in public schools do, and like,
right, of course.
It's just a real salad of crap because it's disrespectful to a majority female profession. Deeply disrespectful to a majority female profession. It's disrespectful to students. It is disrespectful to the people that they're trying to exploit into enforcing their agenda because it treats them like true idiots. Like you truly have to be an idiot to think that what you're doing is fighting the culture war, because what you're doing is furthering an agenda.
It's not until we talked about it in the way that we did today, I think, that even when I was doing the research, that this is not isolated. This is happening in so many places that it's not something that people can ignore because these things are gonna start popping up in places where you don't even expect to see them, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here's another thing that I find very insidious about all of this. Like there's a bill in Iowa that would require classrooms be filmed. There's cameras in every public school classroom except for Phy Ed and special ed classes. And the cameras would feed live streams that could be viewed on the internet by parents, guardians, and others. Really? You want to live stream the kids onto the internet? Great call.
Way to go. That sounds like
something Chuck Grassley came up with. Chuck Grassley and a bunch of like ancient evil ent people.
Chuck Grassley came up with it, and I promise you Olivia Benson opposes it.
Yeah, it's exactly. I'm hearing the Law and Order dunk in my head.
Dunk.
But here's the thing, like they're selling these laws like, well, teachers need to be, safe, blah, 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 blah. And it's absolutely true that in some cases it would be helpful for teachers to have access to cameras in their classroom in the case of fights, for example.
Yep, totally.
Like, I know that in my sister's school that there are fights a lot, and it's a safety issue. But the way that this is actually written and the way that it could be enacted is just like deeply patronizing.
It's for snitching. It's for snitching. It's not for safekeeping. It is for snitching and streaming.
It's so weird. Like, I mean, look, this is the real Pizzagate, man. You're gonna live stream a bunch of second graders to anybody on the internet. God, look. When I grew up in Wisconsin, I had relatives in Iowa. My dad's brother lived in Iowa and my cousins lived there. So we went to Iowa a lot. So I have very fond memories of central Iowa. But my dad would tease my uncle by saying Iowa stands for I owe the world an apology. And I think in this case, it does.
It's quite clever.
Yeah. Or idiots out wandering around, which really really made my uncle angry. Look, we know that there are great Iowans. We know that there's like a lot of hope for the state of Iowa, for the state of Indiana, for the state of Missouri. Texas and Florida even have people down there working as hard as they can to make sure that this shit doesn't happen. And they're doing the Lord's work. But right now it's gross. What is happening, what the people in power are actually doing is deeply, deeply gross. And I don't know, Alyssa, are teachers a group to be fucked with?
I wouldn't fuck with teachers.
I would say no.
Because you know what I'm going to just say? Didn't we all get here because of our teachers? Like, yeah. Why would I want to fuck with the people who got me here? Like, seems kind of illogical. Some would say stupid.
Yeah.
Maybe dangerous.
Yeah. I'm a product of a public K through 12 education. My brother and sister are products of K through 12 public educations. Lots of great products of public educations. And for this country to move in a direction where we are endangering that opportunity for other kids, deeply fucked up. I do not approve, and we will not be shutting up about this.
No, we will not.
Today, we're so pleased to finally welcome Ai Jen Poo to Hysteria. Ai Jen is the co-founder and executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, a nonprofit organization working to bring quality work, dignity, and fairness to the growing numbers of workers who care for and clean in our homes, the majority of whom are immigrants and women of color. Welcome, Ai Jen Poo.
Thank you for having me, Erin.
We're so glad you're here. You've been on our Hysteria dream guest list forever.
No way. Yeah. That's so exciting. I love your show.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we love you back. So let's get this started. Conversations around the care agenda the past couple of years have elevated to the national level and become, for whatever reason, a controversial part of the infrastructure conversation. Discussing the care economy as a vital vertical of the economy isn't something that just happened overnight. Can you talk about the years of work it took for this issue to become a mainstream part of the national conversation?
I think probably if you ask Gloria Steinem, she would tell you that this work has been happening for generations. I know for me, I've been a part of about 25 years of organizing on behalf of mostly women of color who work in the care economy as professionals, as nannies, as childcare workers, as home care workers, and supporting our families with the care that they need across generations and really struggling to survive doing that work. The care workforce is overwhelmingly women, majority women of color, and earn poverty wages and don't have access to paid sick days and paid time off. And these workers have been organizing for decades to try to lift up the dignity and the essential nature of this work. And I think in COVID, more and more of us finally realized just how essential care is to our economy and our society functioning. And we are on the verge, I think, of a really big breakthrough in how this country values care, thanks to a ton of organizing on the part of women. And not just care workers, but family caregivers, moms, all kinds of people with disabilities, older people who've been fighting for the services and supports that they need in order to live whole, dignified lives. All of this advocacy and organizing has kind of come together and converged in this moment. And it's really exciting to see, Erin.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're in Women's History Month. So in that spirit, who are some organizers from the past that our listeners might not know about, but that whose work you're building on? Like, who should we know who was like a care organizer?
I love this question. There is a woman named Dorothy Lee Bolden from Atlanta, Georgia, and she was a Black domestic worker in the South organizing. She actually was a neighbor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and in the height of the Civil Rights Movement, she walked down the street and knocked on his door and said, "Domestic workers want to be a part of this movement." And he said, "Well, great. I need you to organize domestic workers." And she founded the National Domestic Workers Union, which ended up organizing more than 10,000 domestic workers throughout the South and was a critical part of gaining some protections in our federal labor laws for domestic workers that we were then able to build upon in the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years or so.
Wow, that's great. So in that spirit, what priorities should public officials have today when it comes to the care economy? Like, it was a part of Build Back Better. Build Back Better is now kind of on the rocks. How would you like to see the conversation move forward?
Well, I would say first that we still have a huge opportunity in the Senate to get components of the care agenda in Build Back Better across the finish line. So it is not over. In fact, we are in the middle of ramping back up our organizing and advocacy for childcare and home and community-based services and paid leave, including improving the wages and working conditions of the workers who work in the care economy, either in our child care system or in our home care system. And I think we have kind of a 6 to 8 week time horizon where there will be a window where we could get this done, and it would be a game changer. And for those of you who don't know what we mean when we say care economy, we mean the programs and policies that support our families to care for the people that we love so that we can go to work every day. And it includes childcare, making childcare more affordable and accessible. It includes paid family and medical leave. So if you need to take time off to take care of a loved one or spend time with a newborn, you don't have to worry about leaving your job permanently or losing that income. And then home and community-based services for older people and people with disabilities makes it possible for our loved ones to be able to stay at home and in the community with the support of home care workers and other resources so that they don't have to be in nursing homes and separated from their families. So it's a big program that's kind of about how we support families in the 21st century in this country, and really long overdue. We are so far behind other countries on this. And with this agenda, the president's agenda, we can actually make a huge leap forward into the future.
Mm-hmm. So there have already been 10 states and 2 major cities to have passed legislation that's sort of along the lines of the National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. How and why was it successful on the state and local level? And how do we make that successful either on the federal level or in more states and localities?
Well, we definitely need to do both. And, the secret ingredients is just great organizing, good old-fashioned organizing, where women have come together and built coalitions in states and in cities around the country to really recognize and protect domestic work, including nannies, house cleaners, and home care workers who are almost by definition invisible and isolated and really vulnerable to abuse, and have faced a really long history of exclusion from labor laws and protections dating all the way back to the New Deal, when Southern members of Congress didn't want Black workers to have equal protections under the laws. So farm workers and domestic workers were explicitly excluded, and that kind of set a tone for how this workforce would be treated as kind of second class. And so we've been organizing, and literally, domestic workers thousands going to state capitals and city halls and sharing their stories and organizing and pushing, building coalitions with faith-based communities and unions and women's groups. And it's been really exciting to see the movement grow around the country. And we now have a federal domestic workers Bill of Rights that Congresswoman Jayapal and Senator Gillibrand have introduced. And we're really excited to get that through because there's so many states, especially in the South, where it's so hard to get labor pro-worker policies passed. And those workers are some of the most vulnerable and undervalued in the country. So we want to make sure that everyone has basic protections.
So another way that the NDWA is crucial in the work that you do is that you work with Hollywood to engage in telling stories of domestic workers so that maybe people to whom their stories are invisible can kind of get a sense of who these people are and what kind of work they do. Why is the language we use about domestic workers and stories we tell about domestic workers so important? And what are some examples of like triumphant and important depictions of this work on screen?
It's such a good question. I think, early on we realized that even if we pass a whole bunch of laws to protect the rights of domestic workers, so much comes down to the way that we think and feel about this work and the people who do it. And until we shift that, until we change kind of dominant cultural narratives about this work being unskilled or help as opposed to the profession it is for millions of women and women of color, until we really change that, it will be hard to change how people treat domestic workers in the workplace every day. And so that's how changing culture and changing narrative really kind of became a priority of our movement. And who better to shape and reshape narratives than our country's best storytellers who are telling stories that move our hearts every single day in the entertainment industry. And we've been really proud to work alongside people like Alfonso Cuarón, who created the film Roma, that just a stunning, beautiful story that had an indigenous domestic worker as the main protagonist. And, just for those of you who've seen that film, thinking about seeing a domestic worker as the center of the story, as a protagonist, not as kind of someone in the background doing things that supports everything else, but somebody who has dreams, who falls in love, who gossips with her friend, who does sit-ups by candlelight, who is a whole human being with dreams and disappointments and heartbreak, is really, really important, because part of how we allow for injustice to occur or exploitation, or part of how we allow for the devaluing of someone's work to happen is by thinking of them as less than fully a professional, fully a mom, fully a human. And that's what these stories allow us to do, is see people in their three-dimensional whole human selves, as messy and inspiring as the rest of us. And that is what's so important. And I just want to also shout out a show on Netflix called Made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the showrunner, Molly Smith-Metzler, is just a genius. And that show, you really see and feel viscerally the cruelty of living in poverty and how difficult it is for single moms who are doing everything in their power to take care of their kids, and how many obstacles they face, and just how the impossible choices between food and a toy that costs $1 at a dollar store for their kid and enough gas to get you to your job interview. I mean, these choices that are just so impossible that moms have to make every single day in our country because of our failure to really support them adequately. There's a unique way that storytellers like Molly can actually depict that I think is so important.
And I think it was based on a book by Stephanie Land, I want to say.
It sure was. A big shout out to Stephanie.
Yeah, she's another Dream Hysteria guest. So Stephanie, if you're listening, come on, Hysteria. Yeah, it's really interesting. I have a kid. She's 4 months old. And we're now at the phase where we're like interviewing or, looking for childcare. And there are chapters and chapters in books about like how to find a great person to provide childcare. And it's like, you need somebody who is like you're saying, qualified, knows it's a profession, and it's crazy to me, the bifurcation that people are able to hold, like two competing ideas in their head. On one hand, this person needs to be an educator, a caregiver, a person who can perform infant CPR, a person who has all these very specialized skills. But on the other hand, they're not a person who deserves protection. Like, how do we force people to put those two thoughts against each other and expose the hypocrisy inherent in them? Like, is there forcing, or is it something that people need to come to organically? I mean, I know that's a complicated question, but it's just something that's been on my mind a lot.
I think it's both and. I think we have to really strengthen our laws and protections to make sure that they include and protect this work. And the isolation and invisibility of working inside of somebody's home in particular just makes it all the more important that you have these standards and protections in place. So that is one piece of it. And I think that it's on each of us to really lift up the skills required to do this work, and just how essential it is. This work has been referred to as help. It has been deemed unskilled. It has been, relegated to the realm of reproductive labor as opposed to productive labor. And all of those narratives and mindsets reinforce the fact that this isn't work that is equal to other professions. And it's on each of us in our day-to-day interactions to really disrupt that, I think. And I think now is a moment to really do that. I mean, what bigger disruption to everything about the way that we live and work than COVID? And inside of that disruption, we have the opportunity, I think, to reset how we do things, how we approach things, how we value things. And I think valuing what care workers produce, the human potential of a child, the dignity of an older person, the ability of a person with a disability to live in the community and work. These are invaluable assets that they produce for our society and our economy. And the more we start to move it into that framework, I think the easier it'll be for people to be like, well, absolutely. This work deserves benefits, protections, like everything that all of us would expect at work, should apply here too.
Well, Ai Jen Poo of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, thank you so much for stopping by to chat with me. Really appreciate the work that you do, and please come back again sometime.
Thank you so much, Erin. Great to be with you.